Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Warriors Stock Report. Tim Bontemps, senior writer for ESPN in New York. Anthony Slater, senior writer for ESPN in San Antonio. Slater, there were some weird games. Or Buddy Brian Windhorst likes to say there are no weird games. There's just NBA games. I sometimes like to say there's weird games. We saw the Cleveland Cavaliers win with half a team in Miami tonight. We saw some other weird games,
Were you at
but
MSG?
I was at MSG where the
Magic
Magic
popped them, right?
Magic popped the Knicks. Jalen Brunson left in a walking boot. We'll see what happens there. Um, the Hawks beat the Kings, your Kings, by about a trillion. There's a lot
What a
of the
week for
stuff.
the Kings. What a week for the Kings. We
What a
could
week
maybe
for the
do that on the
Kings.
on the backside of the pod.
Well, listen. Well, no, we're not going to be talking about the Kings. They're a disaster. That's
Remember
the end.
last time we did a nice segment last
That's
time.
the end.
We
That's
need
the end of
my
the Kings deserve nothing more than they're a disaster. But the
trade deadline.
segue, the
Just kicked
segue
off.
is the segue is I thought we were going to be talking about the disaster that is the Golden State Warriors because they have had a very rough week. And then on Wednesday, 24 hours after they're in Oklahoma City, they get annihilated by the Thunder, who then came out the next night, tonight, and annihilated the Lakers. Maybe the Thunder are just way better than everybody else. But setting that aside for a minute, it looked like the sky was falling. There was post-game comments. There was a lot of drama, per usual. You're on TV, hustling to San Antonio, do TV this afternoon about the sky is falling around Golden State. And then what happens? Steph Curry has 46. The Warriors beat the Spurs on the second night of a back-to-back and maybe have their best game of the season. So I guess I was sure we were going to be talking about a stock down across the board for Golden State based off where things were this morning. But I would just like you to talk about what the last 30 hours have been like because it's been a definitional roller coaster.
Stock up on Steph Curry's immune system at this point. It's
I would
improving,
say so.
uh, which, in my opinion, has been the most important aspect of this Jekyll and Hyde open to the season for them. Like he was really fresh coming out of the preseason. He looked good. He scored 42 in a win over the Nuggets. Look at his numbers when they go 4-1. And then he was terrible in the Milwaukee Indy games. And then he got a really bad sickness. And then he missed 3 games. And then he came back and was like gassing and huffing and puffing in that Thunder game. Had 20 minutes, 5 fouls, four
There's
of
probably
13.
not a single worse team to play in the league if you're not feeling great or if you're coming off an injury than having
You're
to
a
try to
little,
play this
your
Thunder
dribble's a
team.
little loose or
Yes.
whatever. Yeah. Also, by the way, I mean, side note, committed the first flagrant foul of his 17-year career. It was it was a stunning stat to me, but and to him talking to him post game tonight actually. But to my point, like I think there are a lot of schematic stuff and mindset stuff that has led to the whole 4-1 to 6-6. But also, it was just like Steph Curry, their best player, was awesome, and they got off to a hot start. Steph Curry completely faded and then disappeared for 3 games, and they tanked basically. But he was back; he was himself tonight. This was the 43rd, 40th point game since he's turned 30. That's just one fewer than Michael Jordan. It was like the 43rd time he's had a 20-point quarter. He had a 22 tonight, I believe, in the third, which broke it open. They actually went down 28-14. It looked like it was ugly was snowballing into uglier. But they turned it around in the second half. You mentioned it, and as far as the crisis mode of the Warriors, which we can get into the specifics of it. I asked Steph post game, like 1 to 10. We can rank these Warriors crises because we've been doing this a decade or longer with them, and he said 4, solid 4 was the last 24 hours. Which I told him I was like, I honestly thought he was going to go lower because it's the 13th game of the season. It's not that big a deal what's happening around them. But I was like, 4 is like, that's something. It's
Well,
a speed bump.
it's something because the Western Conference is not for the faint of heart, right? And you can't have a stretch like they've had and drop several games that they could have and should have won and not have that cost you later on. When you have the Spurs getting off to a good start, when you have the Lakers getting off to a good start, you have Minnesota and Houston and Denver. I mean, Jokic had 55 in about 12 minutes tonight. The Thunder are obviously going to be the number one seed, barring something crazy. Like to get into the top six, which, as we've talked about a lot, Golden State needs to get into the top six to avoid the play and to get the break to try to give themselves a chance to make a run.
I think you can almost forget avoiding the play-in now, avoiding the Thunder and Nuggets, right? Because that is avoiding the play-in
Well,
is avoiding the Thunder and
that's
Nuggets.
right. I mean, certainly I would guess they're going to be the top two seeds, probably in that order, Thunder and then Nuggets, just based off the way things look early. But yes, for many reasons, staying in the top six is imperative. And look, that's one of the reasons why this game could wind up being massive. Like, this was a game, this is a definitional schedule loss. We talked about it last week. We weren't sure the Warriors were going to play their guys
They
in this
weren't,
game.
by the way, they weren't. And, Steve Kerr kind of used the excuse of, hey, look, they all played 20 minutes, right? They didn't play in the fourth quarter. It was a blowout. And that's true. It's not like they went, pedal to the metal to try to steal
Yeah.
that Thunder game. They got blown out of the building. But I'm telling you, they played that game because if you're Draymond Green and Jimmy Butler and you're coming out and calling out your teammates and then saying, "Hey, I'm going to ask out of work the next day," like, no, there was team meetings at the hotel, there was film sessions, there was strategic changes to what they were doing, which we'll get into. You can't implement that and be like, "But we're going to take tonight off." So they weren't going to play this game.
Well, and because they got so completely demolished against the Thunder, they do play it and they have maybe their best game of the year. So let's get to some of the stuff that changed today. Second, let's start with the game in OKC. I think a lot of teams are going to go to OKC and have games like this year. I've been saying since the summer, the Thunder remind me of the 2015-16 Warriors, which we both saw in the one of the best series of all time in that Warriors Thunder 7-game series that we covered from start to finish. And the reason I say that is because they came into the season after winning the title and had a lot of people still skeptical of them. And they came out and that team won 24 in a row. This team could go 24-1 and is just demolishing people. But I was like, me being a couple thousand miles away, I was like, that's a bad loss. The Thunder are awesome. Steph's coming back. Ho hum. Then I read the quotes after the game and I was like, oh, okay, there's some more going on here. So if you could, I would be curious sort of what your take is on where the team was coming out of that game, leading into these adjustments, lineup changes, everything else that happened, and sort of what the overall mood is even after this game today.
Yeah, I mean, it had been leading up to that Thunder game, and I do think there was kind of an internal hope that they would show some competitiveness in that game. They had been blown out by the Nuggets, and look, the Thunder didn't have Lou Dort, they didn't have Jalen
The
Williams, they
Thunder
didn't
now
have
has several players. They're just crushing everyone. The second night of a back-to-back tonight, they were up by
for sure.
30 something in the first half on the Lakers, who were really good and rested. Like they're awesome.
I would just say going into the game, there was that feeling from the Warriors, like this is going to be a good competitive game. And even from some people on the Thunder side, Warriors always play as well. They're going to bring their fastball.
Yeah.
You know, I guess you probably underestimated the state of Steph and how, rusty he was going to be coming out of that. But also, the structural and spacing problems, which we've been talking about, this lineup that had kind of been working early in the season, especially the way Kuminga was playing in the first five or so games. But we all still kind of knew they were even admitting that, it could, be an issue, especially against the better teams, especially against a team that it just hounds your dribble. And that was just like kind of the spotlight final version of what had been a struggle over the previous several games. Heavy turnovers. Kuminga had five himself. I think Trace Jackson Davis came off the bench and had five in like 12 minutes. Jimmy Butler was mad at himself about a couple. And well, obviously, Draymond used it as a moment to call the team out very publicly, which, I don't know. You look back on it now and go, it woke him up. I don't know. But it certainly raised the temperature of the room in the situation. And I think the urgency of Steve Kerr to go to some of the changes that he was thinking about. And those changes were in the starting lineup, small ball, spacing, connectors. What's interesting is Moody comes in. He's been playing well. He's been shooting it really well. They want him as the point of attack guy. So he's in, and you wonder who the fifth guy would be. I think me and you would have maybe thought it's Podziemski. That's the lineup I think went 16-3 when they started together down the stretch last season. Podziemski's the connector that Kerr always likes to talk about. But look, he's under a little bit of fire and
Well, hold on.
yeah.
I want to get to that. Let's
Yeah.
have that be separate. So
Will Richard is the guy that ends
Yes,
up.
that was the where I wanted to start. Will Richard, we've talked about a lot. We've talked about Moody a lot. We could set that to the side. If he doesn't get hurt in training camp, he probably is just starting. He's played very well. Will Richard going into the starting lineup in what's a pretty massive spot with the team reeling doesn't put up a lot of stats, but is in the starting lineup. They win the game. My first question is, before we get into the Jonathan Kuminga situation, before we get into Pajemski, before we can talk about anything else, do we anticipate this lineup on Friday? And do we
Yes.
anticipate this lineup for a while?
Yes, on Friday. He already said it. Playing the same team. Steve tends to go with what's working, and it worked for a game. But also made a comment of like, "Hey, I said I was going to start Jonathan Kuminga in that lineup for going forward, and going forward was a certain amount of games." The reality is, if this lineup struggles for 2 to 3 to 4 straight games, he'll pivot to something else. If they play a team where he just feels like I gotta have a center out there, maybe you'll see Quentin Post, maybe you'll see Al Horford. Like he's reserves the right clearly, as he always does, to tinker around. But you will see it Friday, for sure. In the rematch.
And so, as you said, that leaves two very notable guys not starting.
Yeah.
Let's start with Jonathan Kuminga. We've talked about Jonathan Kuminga a lot. He has had a pretty good start to the season overall. In this game, a massive game, he has 1 point or one shot that he missed in 12 minutes and was minus 10 and didn't score.
Well,
So
so quick because this matters. Came into the game with bilateral knee tendonitis. Played in the first half. Didn't come out of the
didn't
locker
play
room.
in the second
They
half.
ruled him
Okay.
out. They ruled him out in the second half.
Okay.
And I talked to him post game. Look, situation is what it is, and we can get into the struggles. It wasn't a good first half from him, but he said his knees were on
Well, I
fire.
admittedly did not know that because I was
Yeah,
covering a game tonight and have been playing catch up on things. So that was part of what I wanted to see. Was there something that kept him from playing extra minutes? Having bilateral knee soreness would be part of that. Um, that then brings us to Pajemski. I would say from reading your coverage, from sort of looking at tea leaves of things, from seeing quotes that were given, uh, you mentioned it before. It would seem that Brandon Pajemski, who does not lack for confidence in himself, uh, was at least partially the target of some of the things that were said. Uh, Sort of, what is your take on that? And I will say, although he did not start, he was plus 10 in 29 minutes,
he
and he
had some
did
moments
fill
in the
up the
second
stat
half.
sheet in the way that he often does.
He had some moments in the second half, even forced a jump ball and went beyond. He was doing more of that, just like kind of gritty stuff that has made them love him so much over his first 3 years, and less of the get his own dribble, dribble, dribble ball creation. Steve had an interesting quote as part of his pregame soundbite where he made it clear, like where he differed from Draymond's comments was he doesn't think anyone on the team is purposely being selfish or that, but he said, you have conversations with guys and you go over film, and then he mentioned a stat. He said, and then you maybe mention to a guy, for example, that his touch time with the ball is up this year, and it's like that's not necessarily Kuminga. Kuminga's been trying some of the other stuff.
That was a comment directed at one person.
Seemed to me, again, like
You've covered the Warriors for a long time, and you
yes.
know Steve for a long
Well,
time. We
yes.
know what Steve was doing.
But he seemed like he came with kind of a little bit more of an altered approach tonight, and less of like kind of get his own, or wandering in and out of places. But he's going to still be a major part of the rotation, and we will see with Kuminga. It will be interesting because
He
he
played the
was,
fourth most minutes today, by the way.
yeah. But with Kuminga, like he can't. They brought him and Al Horford in at the 7 minute mark of the first quarter, so 5 minutes into the game. That is the way they started. But they took Jimmy and Draymond off the floor and brought in Al and Kuminga. And I had heard they wanted to get a Steph Horford Kuminga lineup out there, which is Steph at the one and then the 4-5 being Kuminga Horford. Like I think they do want to see that, and they want Kuminga right now to be what he, by the way, he thought he was when he signed the contract and coming to camp, which was their bench scorer. But his knees got to feel better. He's got to find his place within this new rotation. But to answer your question, they're not burying Brandon Pajemski and Jonathan Kuminga. I think they're just dispersing lineups in a smarter way.
Yeah, and I actually was wrong. He actually played the third most minutes because Draymond fouled out in 27. So the only guys who played more minutes than Podziemski in this game were Steph and Jimmy. So
What a 24 hours from Draymond Green. I mean, he
I
has
would
the
say it was a vintage 24 hours from
it
Draymond Green
was. I
all the
mean,
way around.
he's lighting matches in OKC. He's very much part of like the leadership committee trying to patch things together, which he, ripped apart purposely, clearly. And then he comes in and he was
Lighting
excellent.
people up on social media.
Lighting people up on social media. I forgot about that part.
Yeah.
I believe had another NFL podcast, which it's what he likes to do. And then also came out and like he goes 1 of 10 shooting. I think he missed all 7 of his threes. Leads the team in plus minus.
One of
And
10 shooting in 27 minutes, fouls out, 5 assists, 4 assists, 1 steal, 4 turnovers, 6 fouls, game best plus 15.
game blessed plus minus, and like I don't watch every Wemby game, but that's as good as I've seen Wemby defended. I think Wemby had 8 turnovers, and it was just, and in some ways you're like at the end of it, you're like, was this a great move? Like, was the whole 24 hours like an excellent leadership move by Draymond Green? I don't know.
I don't think we should give him quite that much credit.
I agree that
Like everything else with Draymond Green, there is not a direct answer that explains the entire
there isn't,
situation.
but I will just tell you, sitting on press row next to Nick Friedel, who has gone through this 24 hours,
Oh,
watching
no.
it, and we're sitting there at the end of the 24 hours.
I could hear the track's
Yeah.
famous guffaw from
You're
here.
sitting there at the end of the day, and it's roaring Draymond Green, high-fiving all of his teammates as he's just fouled out of the game with 20 seconds to go and led them to a win that was like pretty shocking. And you're like, what? Like, was this a great move? I like, you're just sitting there laughing, like, what a, it somehow got back to this point where he's over there, roaring in celebration at the end of this 24 hours.
I mean, I don't think Nick will mind me sharing this. Uh, he texted me on a group text yesterday and said, "This team remains pure comedy. There's drama all over the place, nonstop, which there has been for the entire decade you have been around the team, and really going all the way back to, frankly, the Mark Jackson days before Steve Kerr even got there. I mean, we're going on 15 years of just riveting theater with this team. It's what's made it so compelling and so fascinating. And it's what has made it such an iconic group because they have for so often and so long worn their hearts on their sleeves and pretty openly just talked about everything in public and kind of made it like a therapy session for better or worse. And I guess what I wanted to ask you was coming out of this, they're now 7-6. They get a day off Thursday. They then have the end of the baseball series with the Spurs on Friday. It's been a very crazy couple of weeks. Steph being sick, as you said, dropping games they shouldn't have lost or should have won, getting annihilated, and all the chaos that came out of it Tuesday. Coming back and having this crazy performance Wednesday. We barely talked about Steph's 46, but he was incredible. Are they better off now than they were 3 days ago? Is it still TBD? Like
Still
where
TBD. I mean,
where's
again,
the stock right now? Neutral, up, down? Where are we at overall?
well, I would say down from the last time we talked because it wasn't a good week overall. I mean,
No.
up from if we did this podcast last night and up
Yes, that
sitting
is
in
true.
Oklahoma City. Um, I think I think some flaws have been exposed about this team. I think the fact that they can't really seem to survive without Steph, like without a good Steph matters. I mean, like Jimmy Butler had some good non-Steph minutes, right? He can still kind of thrive in some pockets of the game. But you strip a really effective Steph from the ecosystem and they still kind of seem a little lost. And that's a concern with his age and just the tread on the tires. But if their stars are going to be stars, their fastball is going to be, up with the best in the league. And tonight it wasn't just the 46 from Steph. Jimmy Butler, what, 28, 6 and 8, and Jimmy Butler hit 5 3
And
tonight.
0 turnovers.
Oh yeah, which is normal. Jimmy Butler had 0 made threes in 5 November games prior to this, and then he hit 5 threes tonight, including Wembanyama sagging off him late. He hits the dagger.
I would
Uh,
also call that a vintage Jimmy Butler game in that he did everything necessary to win the game when it really mattered, which is what the hallmark of the last several years of Jimmy have been.
yeah, so I guess like narrow view, like, yeah, look, that's the team that I think threatens and breeds confidence in people that they can, be a danger in the Western Conference. But, two steps back, you're like, well, this team has proven when those two guys are not doing that, the rest of the cast is not ready to compete the way they needed to. And that to me screams, mid 40s wins, which is danger territory, which is playing territory. Like that's where I'm at right now with them at 7-6.
This is a bit of a speculative question, and I don't have an answer to it yet myself. So I'm going to ask you it first and then piggyback off it. Um, we talked a lot before the season about the possibility of Golden State trying to maybe make upgrades during the year.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of that centered around Jonathan Kuminga and the possibility of doing something with him. Has your opinion changed off the first 13 games and 3 or 4 weeks as to whether that would be a prudent thing to do with this group as constituted to try to use some of the somewhat limited assets they have to try to do win now stuff with the team that they have?
It's just going to depend on what's available. I don't think they need to go chasing and hunting it down. And, they would tell you, right, going back to the marketing trade, they're not just going to blow all the assets for one faint swing at it. But, look, if depending on where the Kuminga situation is come January 15th through February, whatever the deadline is,
I think it's the fifth.
uh, yeah, you know, he I have covered this Kuminga thing for 5 years to the point of like I would bet by the time January 15th gets here, we've already had like 3 or 4 more like he's
Oh, no
now, oh
question.
now
It's
he's
Golden State.
CFP,
This is not
you
going to
know.
be a flat line path through the season. There's no question about that.
So I guess what I would say is come real trade season and with Kuminga it's a very condensed amount of time, depending on where that's at. He would still put that maybe for both sides it's going to be better.
Well, and
As
I
we
don't even mean just with Kuminga. I mean in
yeah.
general. You said before you think this team is sort of destined to be in the play-in as of now. I
Yeah,
would say that's more likely than not based off where things sit. And
I think
therefore,
one of
do we
the
think that
yeah,
trying to add to this roster is a prudent thing to do
I think one of the
as of
smarter
today?
I think one of the smarter things Dunleavy did last year at the deadline was they didn't love the late lottery to 20s, you know, part of that draft. Of course, sure, love to get Cooper Flag, but they weren't trading away a pick that was Cooper Flag. They knew that. They knew what type of prospects were going to be there, 15 to 22, whatever. So they
Yep.
just traded that pick and it immediately conveyed, and you're not handcuffed with all the other stuff. I could see,
A
maybe
similar path.
throwing, depending on what if they do or don't like this draft at that range. Again, I'm not talking about the top 5 in this draft because that's not where they're going to be drafting.
Yep. Yep.
I could see it making sense. Hey, throw one first. That way you're not mortgaging your post Curry future, which they've been some would say more protective of than they should, but you are sending out the 18th pick in an okay mid-tier part of a draft with, whoever it is, whatever contracts to get maybe a player that fits this team better. I could see that, but or some superstar becomes available. I mean, you've been talking like the Anthony Davis thing's kind of becoming more interesting to me. But I don't even want to send us off on that side path. Oh, I saw those eyebrows. Maybe that's a segment for another day. But
I would say it's for another day. I don't know if I love an Anthony Davis fit with the Warriors, but that's a topic for another day, I think.
yeah,
It's just interesting because I think so much of this season is going to be viewed through the prism of what does it mean for the end of Steph? What does it mean for their chances this year? And look, I'm going to be honest. Part of the reason I have a hard time looking at the team and saying they should go add somebody, I just don't see how the hell they're beating the team they lost to yesterday. Because I don't see anybody's beating the team they lost to
but
yesterday.
I
And
agree. But the one thing I've appreciated about like those Daryl Morey Rockets was like that.
well,
You
Daryl always went for it, and I get it. And I'm sure, and we know Mike Dunleavy well. I'm sure the Warriors are gonna investigate things. I have no doubt that they will. It's just, and look, we could be sitting here in 2 weeks, and Steph could be healthy for 2 weeks, and they could easily be 14-8, and we could be thinking totally differently about him again. I think for a lot of these teams, I would say that Oklahoma City, Houston, and Denver are going to be in their own tier. And I think after that, you saw the Spurs tonight. They are very hot and cold, and Victor certainly is a guy who has a body that could cause him to miss a little time. If that happens, they're going to struggle. The Lakers are going to be an up and down team, I think, throughout the year. Though they're if Luka keeps playing like this, they got a good chance to be in the top 4 or 5. Minnesota, I think, is going to be a streaky team that's pretty flawed. The point guard position there is a real problem. The Clippers are completely out of the mix, I think, at this point. They look terrible. But then you've got the Warriors, who, to your point, if their guys are playing well, they're going to feel like they can play with anybody. And they're old. Their guys are also old. And if they don't have it, then they can lose to a lot of teams. And that's already what we've seen through the first 20 days of the season. That's been, they've had some incredible highs this game, the Denver win, and they've had some incredible lows between the Pacer loss, the Milwaukee loss.
Denver loss was really big. The Denver and Oklahoma City loss was like, oh, you're not on this tier of, being right now as a team. Like that almost, like the Indy Milwaukee was more detrimental, but the Denver OKC was more sobering to them, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, look, that's if you're Steph Curry, you're trying to do one thing, which is trying to get a 5th ring, right? And you got to go through, let alone the Thunder, you got to go through Denver. And that, obviously they didn't have everybody for the Denver game. So that's one thing. But like you said, you come out, it's the same thing with the Lakers tonight. Yes, I know LeBron isn't playing, but you come out of this game against the Thunder, you're down 30 at halftime and you're shooting like 30% from the field. And it's like, how the hell are we going to beat this team when they don't even have Jalen Williams yet? They don't have Lou Dort. They don't have all these guys. And like, it doesn't matter. We'll just play whoever we're going to play and we're going to steamroll everybody. It is, it's part of what's going to make this such a interesting season in Golden State, and why it will be fun to follow. Now, I guess the final thing before we wrap up, we've talked a lot about the emotions of the last 24 hours and sort of the roller coaster that it's been. Obviously, it will be hard to sweep this series. I'm going to guess they'll lose Friday to San Antonio just because it's hard to sweep a baseball series. We saw the Cavs with half their team beat Miami tonight in the second game of the baseball series.
Friday's going to be fun.
Anytime you get to see Victor in person, it's fun. Victor and Steph, especially. I mean, there aren't going to be a lot of those, and it will be appointment viewing. But what do we think, from your vantage point, the lasting effects are of the past day, if there are any, and sort of where do we see things going over the next week or so?
I think the next week or so, they're trying to at least go 2-2 in the Final Four, which would give them a 3-3 6-game road trip, which would be, deep business, well done ish. They're not going to be pumping their fists coming out of this trip 6-6, but I think considering they actually have a lot of cushy type home schedules awaiting them over the next couple of months because of how road heavy they've been. I think that would be fine for them. They're going to be favored in the game against the Pelicans. Can they get one of the 2 Florida games? Could they steal the Friday game against New Orleans? If they can somehow, I think, if they can somehow win 3 out of the next 4 and come out of this road trip 4-2, like then you're like, okay, they really, set this thing back on track. But, that's what we'll know by the next time we talk. As far as the lasting effects of the last 24 hours, I'm going to keep tracking the Kuminga thing. There's a reason we talk about it so much. There's a reason why people were very intrigued by his first 5 games because of some of the stuff he does do, which again, we don't need to get into, but we all understand like he has skill sets that this roster could utilize, but obviously it's a bad fit and the personality dynamics and the scar tissue and blah, blah, blah. But when you ask lasting effects, like that's, my curiosity. I talked to him post game tonight. He was, in a generally decent mood. Again, his was talking about his knees some, but this is disappointing to him. And he's not being a bad apple in the locker room at this current moment. He was talking to Guy Santos and, chumming it up with his teammates. They're staying in San Antonio, obviously. So he's fine in general, but again, this is the 95th time he's felt like, traction in his career was happening and the rug gets pulled out. And again, I understand that there's performance reasons and fit stuff, but he's a human, and he's a potentially important trade piece or rotation piece. And when you ask lasting effects of the last 24 hours, that's what I think about.
I mean, of course, because it's been the story for 5 months and it will be the story for another 3 months.
Yeah.
You're right. Like that's the way of the season. And yeah, it's one of many reasons why the Warriors are many things, but one of them is not boring because they just remain to be the most interesting ongoing drama in the league. It's why you're there. It's why you're here with us. And I'm glad you got to see that game, and then you'll see another good one Friday, and we'll see where things go from there. So we'll be back next week for another edition of the Stock Report. Who the hell knows what will have happened between now and then, given what happened over the last week. I'm sure it'll be interesting though. But Slater, thanks for staying up late after your game, and thank you all for watching, and we'll see y'all next week. Try to boast at what I look like. Think I'm going try to wear I pull up long range. Jimmy with the heat, I'm on fire. It's NBA on the list,